Okay, so I thought I'd start this evening in Daniel chapter 3 and to see how that connects with our understanding of the times that are happening, because we are living in what we consider the antitypical 1260 days that will follow a pattern of persecution by a church-state union. And this persecution by a church-state union is described here in Daniel chapter 3 in the life of Daniel. It tells us, beginning at verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So in Daniel chapter 2, just previous to this, God gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream with a mighty image made of many different metals. Gold, a head of gold, which represented himself, King Nebuchadnezzar, and Babylon, but then also the chest and arms of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet of iron and clay. And the wonderful interpretation of the dream and the dream itself that God gave to Daniel, that God might be glorified. But here in Daniel chapter 3, even though Nebuchadnezzar had been very strongly impressed by Daniel in that previous encounter, he wasn't fully converted at that time. And so his pride came back and manifested here as he has the idea to make an image like the image that he saw in his dream, except this image would be all gold from head to toe, sort of defiantly saying to God that my kingdom will last forever. And these other kingdoms will not rise, and your everlasting kingdom represented by the stone, that's not needed because my kingdom is going to last forever. It's pure gold. So the whole idea here in Daniel chapter 3 is this prideful boasting, proud boasting, and in rebellion against God and his authority and rulership, his law, which we saw is the principle of the daily. And this proud boasting in rebellion against the law of God. So, in this self-exaltation, and that's what Nebuchadnezzar is engaging in. He's really got this principle here that grew through each successive nation that ruled, and then ultimately was brought right into the church in the time of the papacy, the type for us right now in antitype that we're expecting. So we really see a beautiful connection here. And how does he make this image? Not only is it all gold, but it's 80 cubits high. For those don't know the old English, 80 means 60. A score is 20, so 80 is 60 cubits. And the breadth thereof is 6 cubits. And when it's talking about the breadth there, it's actually talking about the breadth and the width. So both three-dimensionally. So it's really a 666 image that's being set up here in Daniel chapter 3 on the plain of Dura. And the passage continues in verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So we see here that this is where we get our sermon title for this evening, Come to the Dedication. Has the time come when we're being bidden to come to the dedication of the 666 image and to willingly bow down? I believe that we are in such a time. And the call is going forth, come to the dedication. And it's a very interesting list here of people that were invited to come to the dedication and who actually attended the dedication, because it tells us in verse 3, then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So we see here the whole list, a very long list and detailed list of who's invited to the dedication, and all of them is, according to the list, is, do any of them not come? And the answer is no. They all come when bidden to come to the dedication of the 666 image. And why would God repeat such a long list in 2 back-to-back verses in the scriptures? I mean, there's only so many things that can be talked about in the scriptures. And why did God dedicate that much space to be recorded in his word, unless it must be something very important? The ancient writers did not have the tools of emphasis that we have today in grammar and syntax, that they couldn't bold or italicize or underline or emphasize with the voice when speaking. So one of the ways that God uses to put emphasis, to say this is important, is through the principle of repetition. So that this very long list is repeated twice to us, back to back in verses. God says, pay attention to this. This is important. And I agree. I think it's very important, because it's quite an amazing list of those who came to the dedication of the image. First of all, the king himself was there. And the king, of course, is representative, as we've seen through other passages, the kings of the earth, such as in Revelation 18, that commit fornication with the woman and with the beast. These kings of the earth, that represents a civil political power that has the power to make and enforce laws. That's the king, the leader of the national government, as it were. So then also the princes are those who are royalty. They are the elite royalty of society that often are also rulers of certain territories. We also have here governors. Governors with what we would equate with today to the head of states. Here in America, for instance, they're called governors, and that term very much well applies to that. A smaller regional ruler, government ruler. Then we also had, who else came? The captains. Who are the captains for us today? That's the head of the military. The captains includes all of the military leadership. And in a special way, since the image we know gets first set up in America, that would be like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff here. It would also include all of the military advisors that go along with that, like the military intelligence agencies. Like so we also have the judges. So that's the whole judicial branch. In a special way, that might be represented by the Supreme Court here in America also. But it's all the judges. This is representative judicial branch of government. We have all the treasurers also were bidden and came to the dedication. That's the whole world of finance. That's Wall Street today. That's all of the banks, the hedge funds, the central banks, the true global leadership in finance. We also have the counselors. The counselors were the advisors, the experts. They would be the scientists today. Listen to the science, we're being told, for both the coronavirus pandemic and also for the environment. Listen to the scientists. It would include the professors and the academia today as well. And I would also include in the counselors all of the domestic intelligence agencies are counseling the government. And so the FBI, the NSA, all of these organizations, all the three-letter entities and the no-name government agencies are part of the counselors. They also are invited and attend. The sheriffs, that's local law enforcement. And the rulers of all the provinces. So that would be the heads of local governments, counties and cities and towns and villages. And how many of the provinces are left out? That would be none. All the rulers of the provinces come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So we've seen in our last few sermons how all of these groups are now involved in a very distinct and public way even in managing the coronavirus crisis, that they're all working together under the principle of subsidiarity, where things happen at the local level as much as possible, all the rulers of the provinces, together with the sheriffs, the local law enforcement. But then higher levels like the state administration, the governors, and the state sheriffs, the state police, and some of the counselors maybe at the state level. And then there's a higher level, the national level. And then there's even a king over them all. Interesting. Is there a global king in addition to the national leadership? Is there an international global king who's over them all, who's setting up the image? So, and we've got the military involved. We've got the intelligence agencies involved. We've got all your local police involved. We've got you can't go to the courts and get relief. They're all involved. They're going to control all the money and whether you can buy or sell. All of those came to the dedication. The advisors and the academics and the theologians, they're all on board and attend the dedication of the image. And then interestingly, there's actually one more group that's not mentioned here who also participates. And we see it in verse 4, and that tells us, then a herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth, the same shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So we see here there's a herald who cries aloud. Who is the herald that cries aloud today to spread the message about the setting up of the 666 image and inviting everybody to come and bow down? Even telling them that they're commanded to bow down. That would be the media. The media also is part of this dedication of the image. And the media cries aloud and tells everybody that they're commanded to bow down to the image and worship, render obedience to the image, or face a burning fiery furnace. Have you noticed that there's a lot of commanding going on these days that's getting communicated to us through the media? That it's not laws that are the basis of it, it's just commands, dictates, orders, rules, but they're not constitutional. They don't have a sound legal basis, They don't even they don't follow the national constitution, the state constitution, the laws as set up. They don't, and they certainly don't follow God's law. And yet there's many commands going about to all peoples, nations, and languages about how they're supposed to behave, and that they're to render unquestioning obedience to all of these commands. And while seemingly they're all dealing just with this health crisis, we've seen that the health crisis has now directly affected worship. And that worship can't be engaged in the way it used to be freely, and that it's under the control of government commands or dictates. So we see it's a pretty grim situation if the Lord weren't on our side, because everybody, all the powerful institutions of the world are together. In Revelation 13, talking about the beast, it said, who can make war with the beast? When you've got this group of people on your team, as it were, who can make war from a human perspective against it? It's like when we were little kids and you were dividing up teams in gym class to play some game. And everybody always tries to pick the best athletes to be on their team first. And imagine that all the star athletes went to one team. And it's just the ragtag leftovers, the remnant left on the other team. But we've got God on our team, praise the Lord. But we see this is a fearful situation with all of these levels, all levels of government, from the local to the state to the national to even the global, and the royalty, the military, the judiciary, the finance, the academics, the local law enforcement, the media, all of them, the intelligence agencies, everybody's on board. So let's see some more updates. We'll come back to Daniel chapter 3 in a moment. So it tells us here that yesterday was that fateful day we were looking for, May 14th, 2020, the feast day of Saint Kavanaugh, the patron saint of pandemics in the Catholic faith. That day that was scheduled to be the signing of the global educational pact, to have all of the world's political and religious leaders come to the Vatican to sign a pact legally obligating them to implement the world core curriculum on the principles of theosophy and the writings of Alice A. Bailey, that Lucifer is the light of the world. And that had to be postponed because of the coronavirus pandemic, even though it had been scheduled for yesterday, long before the coronavirus pandemic began. That they set the date of the feast day of St. Kavanaugh, May 14th, 2020, for that signing. It's now been pushed back to October, but not to let that wonderful feast day of St. Kavanaugh go to waste. The Pope called for all of the religions of the world, everybody of every faith in the world, to pray for God to end the pandemic on May 14th, yesterday. Here's a little article about it from Crux News, taking the Catholic pulse. And it tells us here, at a time of global tragedy and suffering because of the coronavirus, and in view of the long-term impact it will have, believers of every religion should beg mercy from the one God and Father of all, Pope Francis said. Again, we talked about this in our sermon last week, how all of these ones are coming together. And here, this is an account of what he actually prayed now. We saw last week that it was planning to happen this week, and now this is what he talked about on the actual day. And again, it was for every religion. No matter what you believe, we can all pray together and God will hear our prayers. During his early morning mass, Pope Francis joined leaders of every religion, marking May 14th as a day of prayer, fasting, acts of charity to ask God to stop the coronavirus pandemic. So prayer, fasting, and acts of charity. A very righteousness by works mindset there. If we just do something right, God will forgive us and take away this punishment of the coronavirus. Seems to be the mindset. We see Pope Francis join leaders of how many religions? Every religion. March, May 14. Would that include, for instance, Seventh-day Adventists? Is that one of the religions of the world? Were there leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church marking yesterday as a day of fasting, prayer, and acts of charity? I don't know. It seems, according to this account, that every religion responded positively to the call. As the reporting is here, we'll have to find that out. Some people might think it hasn't affected me. Thank God I'm safe. But think about all the others. Think about the tragedy and also about the economic consequences, the consequences on education, the Pope said in his homily. We've got to plug that education that was supposed to be signed today there on May 14th. Make sure everybody remembers that. That is why today, everyone, brothers and sisters from every religious tradition, are praying to God. Are we all brothers and sisters together by religious tradition? My Bible says that we become the children of God when we are born again. Unless you're born again, then you're not actually a child of God. Now, everybody has the opportunity and the possibility of making that choice, but we know very few actually do make that choice. And only those that do would truly be brothers and sisters. But here, no matter what you believe, if you want to worship the trees, that's fine. You're a brother and sister. We can pray together. If you have a million gods, that's okay. We can pray and worship together. God will hear, no matter what you believe, what you're thinking while you're praying, who you're looking to, what it means for you. None of that really matters. As long as we can just pray together, we can still pray together. The day of prayer was called for by the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity, an interfaith group of religious leaders formed after Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, signed a document in 2019 on promoting dialogue and human fraternity. We've examined very closely in previous talks that human fraternity, which comes directly from the world goodwill of the Lucis Trust at the United Nations or the Lucifer Publishing Company. And this human fraternity is absolutely a Luciferian principle of coming together in unity in error. And that was the basis for calling everybody to come together and pray together yesterday on May 14th. During the Pope's Mass, live stream from the chapel, Domus Sancte Mater, he said he could imagine some people would say that gathering believers of all religions to pray for a common cause is religious relativism. And you can't do that. I would have to actually agree with that statement. It is religious relativism. It's all relative, what we believe, and it's all good. We can still all come together, and God will be pleased by us doing that, is the mindset. But how can you not pray to the Father of all? So even though he acknowledges it's actually religious relativism to all to come together, he says, but how can you not do it? How can we not do it? We are all united as human beings, as brothers and sisters. We are certainly all human beings, praying to God, each according to our own culture, traditions, and beliefs. But brothers and sisters praying to God. This is important. Brothers and sisters fasting, asking God to pardon our sins so that the Lord would have mercy on us, and that the Lord would forgive us, and that the Lord would stop this pandemic. Of course, there's many cultures, traditions, and beliefs that don't even have a concept of needing forgiveness or that what sin is. And so how could we all pray together that God would actually have mercy on us and forgive us and pardon our sins when we don't even ask for the true God to do that, or look to the sacrifice of his son and his blood actually to provide that forgiveness? But we can all still pray together. It's all good, according to Pope Francis. But the Pope also asked that people look beyond the coronavirus pandemic and recognize that there are other serious situations bringing death to millions. So here, very interesting, the Pope's prayer yesterday, saying that everybody can come together, no matter what you believe, and God is going to be pleased and happy. It will be very interesting to see what happens with the coronavirus pandemic now. I mentioned this last week. We can see one of two avenues. Either way works good for them. And that is either there's suddenly a great pullback and seeming break in the coronavirus that we can tie to this date. And that would look like God heard the prayer and answered. Or if it doesn't get better and it gets worse, then they can say, well, it's because not everybody participated in the prayer, that God didn't answer. So either way, we can see this being turned around against us. The groundwork has been laid. Very interesting here, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we saw last week, he was the one who said that the Sustainable Development Goals weren't happening fast enough and that 2030 was too late, and we had to start doing them by 2020. He gave us that great rallying cry that the Sustainable Development Goals had to be start implementing by 2020. And now here in 2020, with this pandemic that has come up and many of the Sustainable Development Goals are now being implemented as a consequence, he says he joins Pope Francis and Azhar Imam to pray for humanity on May 14th. So the United Nations and all the governments of the world, they're all in with all of the religions of the world. So the governments and the religions are all praying together for this intercession from, quote, God to end the coronavirus pandemic. And we all prayed together on May 14th, the feast day of St. Corona, for her intercession as well, no doubt. It's all good. You can pray to St. Corona and ask for intercession that the pandemic might end, because everybody, no matter what you believe, let's all pray together. So that's very interesting. Let's look at some else of what's happening right now. Here in Illinois, Governor, churches can't fully reopen until coronavirus vaccine or effective treatment developed. We're going to have to figure out how to live with COVID-19 until it can be vanquished. So according to the governor of Illinois, Governor Pritzker, that churches can never again fully reopen unless there's a coronavirus vaccine or an effective treatment developed. What if one's never developed? Then churches can just never fully reopen ever again, as far as Governor Pritzker is concerned. He had a staged 5-phase plan for reopening Illinois, and churches will be unable to seat more than 50 people until the coronavirus is effectively abolished. So even when they get to the last phase of opening up, all churches will still be limited to 50 people at the most forever, unless coronavirus is actually abolished from the face of the earth, according to Governor Pritzker. And so we could go through the details here. It's very interesting, the stages, but none of them actually involve giving freedom again for churches to decide how and when to meet and how to worship. The governor is going to retain permanent control forever over when and how we can worship, at least if you're from Illinois. Very interesting. Here's an interesting article. Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is actually a U.S. territory, for those who don't know. The governor there extends lockdown and curfew, key deadlines and governmental measures in response to COVID-19. This is from April 6, 2020. It tells us that here in Puerto Rico, the state of emergency declared across the island since March 12th has been updated with executive orders since, and among those executive orders that are now in place since April 1st, 2020, is a limit on traffic that includes an interesting detail. That it tells us that there's certain days, depending on what your license plate number is, you can go out on different days of the week. Either if you're an odd number, then Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, an even number, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, trying to limit traffic on the road. But no one can use their cars on Sundays. Isn't that interesting? Of all the days that they could possibly pick to say, let's have one day off from anybody on the road, it's Sunday. And then also, in addition to that, increasing businesses closures on Sundays. Grocery stores must remain closed on Sundays. And pharmacies will only be allowed to sell medicines and personal hygiene products, and gas stations may only sell fuel. So there's a special provision on what you can buy and what economic activity, what businesses can be open, especially just on Sunday, as a consequence of the coronavirus pandemic. This is all an emergency order in response to COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic. And now suddenly they're making special rules. They initially made rules just blanket, everybody stay home. But now as we're opening back up and relaxing some of those rules, they're implementing new rules as part of that, where Sundays need to be specially honored here in Puerto Rico, a U.S. territory. Very interesting. Here we have in the Grand Cayman Islands, where it tells us that they have a curfew policy in the Grand Cayman Islands, in the Caribbean, and it tells us is currently following a soft curfew during the day from Monday to Saturday, 5 a.m. to 8 p.m., followed by a hard curfew from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. daily. So during the daylight hours, it's a soft curfew. But at night, overnight, when it's dark, there's a hard curfew all week long. But also all day on, there's a hard curfew Sunday. There's no relaxing the rules during the day on one day a week, and that one day of the week just so happens to be Sunday here in the Grand Cayman Islands. This is again in response to the coronavirus. Direct policy in response to the coronavirus, limiting business on Sunday here in the Grand Caymans. Continues on that here, beginning in the third paragraph, a still ongoing hard curfew at nighttime and all day Sunday that requires closure of all but essential businesses is enacted under the police law. The order strictly curtailing access to all beaches across Grand Cayman is also enacted under the police law. So it goes on to tell us some of the really interesting details about the differences and the penalties that go on. By the way, the penalties are higher for violating the hard curfew than the soft curfew. You'd actually go to prison for a whole year and $3,000 fine if you do anything on a Sunday in the Grand Cayman Islands anymore. It's not allowed. Very, very interesting. So now we've got Puerto Rico and the Grand Cayman Islands. Well, you might say, well, those are just two tiny little islands out there in the middle of nowhere. Why does that matter? Complete shutdown announced for businesses in Cayo on Sunday. Well, here's a tiny little nation to go with those tiny little islands. It's the government of Belize. Here from Thursday, April 9th, 2020. It introduced a new statutory instruction that indicates that on Sundays in the Kaya district, a main district there must be a complete shutdown of businesses, except for a certain special group of businesses that get to keep doing what they want to anytime and make money if they're insiders. But any movements on Sundays must be by essential workers only or for emergencies only. The public is urged to comply with the regulations here in Belize. Belize is in Central America, for those who don't know where Belize is. So we've got a little country to go with those little islands, making special provisions to close everything on Sundays as a response to the coronavirus. Here from CNN, April 4th, 2020, total lockdown in General Santos City every Sunday in the Philippines. Well, Philippines is quite a bit, much bigger nation than those, population-wise. In a new rule in General Santos City, now even those with quarantine passes will be forced to stay home every Sunday as the local government steps up measures to remain coronavirus-free. So here, even if you've got a quarantine pass, and by the way, you can't go around and move around at all without your quarantine pass, at least in the Philippines right now. But even if you've got one, that doesn't apply on Sundays. You got to stay home on Sunday. The total lockdown will be imposed every Sunday starting April 5th, the city government of General Santos announced. So very interesting policy here on the front lines of Sunday and the lockdown here in the Philippines. Okay, so we've got Puerto Rico, we've got Grand Cayman, we've got Belize, we've got the Philippines, all enacting provisions to restrict economic activities specifically on Sunday in response to the coronavirus pandemic. But that's not all. Peru is a pretty big country as well. April 3rd, 2020, coronavirus. Peru announces social restrictions by gender. Men will be allowed to leave their homes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, while women can go out on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Well, that's a pretty bizarre policy. You can only go out by gender in Peru, and it's either Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, depending if you're male or female. That's interesting. But on Sunday, no one is allowed to leave home. Period. There is now a Sunday law also in Peru as a response to the coronavirus pandemic. That one that we were reminded by our General Conference president is not a sign of the end. It's not the final crisis. Nothing to see here, nothing to worry about. Go back to sleep. But Sunday law is being enacted all over the world as a response to the coronavirus pandemic. That as we saw in our previous sermons recently, that the response to the emergency of the coronavirus pandemic was planned in advance. Whether or not the actual coronavirus epidemic itself was planned or just accidental or just natural, however it came about, the response to the pandemic and the crisis that has come about was planned. It was a planned crisis response that would create a crisis, whether or not there was a crisis or not. The actions taken in response to the public health emergency of the coronavirus epidemic or pandemic. And that now we're seeing as they're implementing those policies and giving us more details in country after country after country, part of that planned response, in advance planned response, is limiting business on Sundays. Here we have Montreal Gazette from Montreal, Canada. It tells us here, most Quebec stores will be closed on Sundays as coronavirus cases mount. Suddenly, with upswing in positive COVID-19 cases and 3 more deaths, Premier Francois Legault has announced nearly all stores, including grocery stores, will be closed on Sundays for the month of April to give workers under intense pressure a break and a few exceptions to that rule. I did look up and I could find nowhere where I found that they have relaxed or removed or reversed this order, even though we're now a couple Sundays into May. So now in Montreal, most stores closed on Sundays because of the coronavirus. Cyprus Mail, coronavirus. Shoppers and supermarkets say Sunday closing makes no sense. Well, here are some people that actually have some sense who realize that this makes no sense. Shoppers and supermarkets alike are unhappy with the latest restriction imposed by the government that will see supermarkets closed from this Sunday. The decision to close supermarkets, grocery shops, bakeries, and butcheries on Sundays for the next few weeks is meant to protect shop workers in essential services. Kiosks are allowed to remain open under the decree, but can only sell a list of items decreed under previous regulations. So here's another place, Cyprus, where supermarkets and grocery stores and important staples of life are no business on Sunday. And the people say, well, they think this just doesn't make sense. I'm with them. They think it's actually going to lead to crowds on other days. That's an interesting observation. And there's actually a very long list of things you can still buy on Sunday, even though you can't shop on Sunday. Things like cigarettes and all those very important, crucial items that we have to have access to even on Sunday. Very, very interesting here in Cyprus. But that's not all. Shops in Croatia to close on Sundays, April 25th, 2020. Croatia is about to start the first of its 3 phases of lifting lockdown measures. The first phase, starting on Monday, April 27th, will enable the opening of all retail entities apart from those in shopping centers, the exception being those stores that have been operating in shopping centers the entire time since the introduction of the restriction. There will be a return to normal working hours for shops on Monday. Trading, however, will be banned on Sundays. Trading, however, will be banned on Sundays. It tells us again down here, all shops will be working as they worked before, except on Sundays and national holidays, according to Interior Minister Davor Bozanovic. Of course, the Interior Minister, that's like anciently the head of the KGB or the local KGB unit in a Soviet country, satellite country. So they'd be like the head of the FBI or something here in America, essentially. And they tell us he's decided no business on Sunday, no trading on Sunday in the entire nation of Croatia. Tirana Times, Albanian government tightens restrictive measures amid COVID-19. This is from March 28th, 2020. What's happening in Albania? As of Monday, only 1 person per household will be allowed to go out in order to do grocery shopping or errands for 1 hour a day between 5 a.m. and 1 p.m. in Albania. Each person is required to apply online and via text message in order to receive the movement authorization from the Albanian government. Well, that sounds pretty restrictive. However, the authorization is not required for those who go to work. However, those who surpass the 1 hour permit will not be fined, as this is only serves to regulate the movement of people. As for now, no special requirements have been announced for foreigners currently living in Albania. It gives the text message number to text to. And it continues on with some of the details and all the IDs you need. And meanwhile, the Albanian government has restricted all movement from 1 p.m. on Saturday to 5 p.m. on Monday, thus prohibiting all activity and movement on Sunday. So Albania now has Sunday law. Here is a media organization from Athens, Greece. Government announces changes to supermarket hours. No more Sunday opening. The government on Tuesday announced changes to supermarket hours, opening hours, which were extended to respond to the additional demand amid restrictions on movement imposed by the curb with the spread of coronavirus. As of Thursday, supermarkets will be open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. from Monday to Friday, and from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Saturday, and will be closed on Sundays. The opening of supermarkets on Sundays have been broadly denounced by labor groups as an unacceptable burden on supermarket workers. Interesting. So in response to the coronavirus crisis, they're closing the supermarkets all day in Greece, in Athens here, and it's because of the complaints of labor groups. Let's keep that in mind. Let's remember that as we press on here. The labor groups. Because also in Slovenia, Jansa on the left called to keep stores closed on Sundays. This is starting to sound like a hit parade. It just keeps going on and on and on. All simultaneously within about a month of each other, all in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Multiple nations, nearly 10, I think we've just discussed right now, have all decided that one of the responses to the coronavirus pandemic is we need to legislate, we need to make orders that you cannot do business on Sunday, where they're implementing these planned response to the crisis that came in advance. Long before the crisis came, the response to the crisis had already been developed. And here we see now, here is yet another country that has come up with the plan in response to the coronavirus is to make people not be able to do business on Sunday. And it was the same here. It's very interesting in this one. It seems increasingly likely that the closure of stores, including groceries on Sundays, as a result of the coronavirus epidemic, will become permanent arrangement and will be extended also to the period after the crisis. Whoa. So here, this response to the coronavirus crisis is actually being made permanent already here on April 30th of 2020. Permanently from now on in Slovenia, yes, Slovenia, there is no longer any store openings, including groceries, on Sundays. And it's permanent arrangement that's going to extend past the period of the crisis. Even if the coronavirus crisis completely goes away, there'll be no more shopping on Sunday in Slovenia. In announcing the legislative proposal, the left joined today the trade union shop of assistance, which argued ahead of the Labor Day in favor of keeping stores closed on Sundays and bank holidays, also after the epidemic. So here's another country. In addition to what we saw here in Greece, it was the trade unions. We also have the labor unions, and we've also got the trade unions as well here. Or was that back here in Albania with the labor unions? So we've got two countries now that it's specifically been identified that it's the labor unions that are pushing for these measures to protect the workers by letting them rest on Sunday. And the left pointed out that voters had already decided in a referendum to close the stores in 2003, but no one had paid attention and done it. But now with the coronavirus, it's being implemented. Now it's being done. So, okay, let's read a quote from the testimonies to help us understand this. And the trade unions will be one of the agencies that will bring upon this earth a time of trouble such as not been since the world began. From letter 200, 1903, page 3, to Elder G.I. Butler. The prophet, under inspiration, says that the trade unions will be one of the agencies that bring upon this earth a time of trouble such as not been since the world began. Who's calling for Sunday closing businesses in Slovenia? The trade unions. Who was it? I believe it was in Albania, maybe. Where was it? The labor unions we saw. Push them to do it. Was it in Greece? I don't remember. Yes, the labor unions, yes. The labor groups here in Greece as well. By the way, one of these earlier had a very interesting comment I forgot to highlight. Ah, yes, here. Back, forgot to mention this, in Croatia, as their justification for closing on Sunday with the coronavirus pandemic, it tells us here, I'm sorry for the small print. I don't know what I can do to make it bigger. Let's see if I can make it bigger for us. In closing, there we go. The shops on Sundays, it says that they worried that they were going to face some backlash to that. But we have, it says here, the head of the National Coronavirus Crisis Management Team, Interior Minister Davor Bozanovic, said on Saturday that the decision banning Sunday work was made based on the recommendations of epidemiologists. Wait, what? Declining to comment on speculation that the present situation was being used for political purposes. Interesting speculation. We have regulated shop opening hours as part of our measures. The decision was made based on the recommendations of epidemiologists. All decisions were made in accordance with the recommendations from professionals. It's the professionals. Listen to the scientists. They say, the scientists say we got to close on Sunday for the coronavirus pandemic to be brought to an end. Wow, listen to the scientists. The epidemiologists say the day to take off and rest is Sunday, so forget what the Bible says. The epidemiologists say it's Sunday, so let's take Sunday rest, and let's rest on Sunday. Really, really interesting. Here in the UK, coronavirus in the UK. Teaching unions say schools can't reopen without test and trace scheme and extra money for cleaning. PPE supplies, extra funding for deep cleaning classrooms, and proper contact tracing. Technology must be in place, bodies say. So here, the teachers' unions have unveiled a list of key measures they believe must be met before pupils in England should be allowed to go back to school. The unions are calling for the schools to remain shut until a successful nationwide track and trace scheme, I'm going to have to talk about that, to identify those who need to quarantine is in place. And we're going to have to look at this, but we see here, where am I? I'm looking for the quote here. Yeah, here we go. The Labor Shadow Education Secretary, Rebecca Long-Bailey, further called on the government to take heed of the measures set out by the trade unions. We got to listen to the trade unions. Schools should not open until it's safe to do so, and the government must commit to work with trade unions and others to agree on a set of principles and tests to put safety systems in place to advance any planned reopening. So the government needs to work with the trade unions to meet their demands to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. And we've seen we've already got two countries where, at least two, where the trade unions are saying you have to let us rest on Sunday to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Here in England, you got to listen to the trade unions. They're in charge of when the schools can open. They're in charge of when the churches can open. When the businesses can open, when anybody can open. Here, this starts to get really interesting now. Are they just promoting Sunday? Is that all that's going on? Here's 4:30, April 30th, 2020. What will school look like in August? The Miami-Dade School District has some ideas. As the state looks to gradually reopen, South Florida accepted, for now, the Miami-Dade County School District is thinking about what school may look like come August. At Wednesday's school board meeting, held by a video conference, Superintendent Alberto Calvajo talked about what might have to change in order to return to the schoolhouse. he laid out a plan for struggling students who may have fallen further behind during the coronavirus pandemic. So because all the kids are out of school, many of them don't have parents around that can teach them, or parents that are working, or don't have the resources and the online materials and the computers and such to keep up with all the schoolwork, or maybe they're just not keeping it up at all just because they're home. Who knows? But they're making plans for the struggling students who are falling behind. That sounds nice. But what are their plans? For the general population, it could be using schools with lower enrollments and therefore more capacity for social distancing and temperature checks at the doors. For those students who need extra help, it means an earlier start to the school year, longer school days, and a jump start on Saturday school. Wait, what? Saturday school? What's Saturday school? And this is response to the coronavirus pandemic. That they're going to have masks and temperature checks and vaccination requirements and all these other things. But if you get falling behind in school, we've got a solution. You can go to school on Saturday to catch up. Let's start implementing Saturday school so that kids can catch up because of what we've done here with our planned crisis of the coronavirus response. Very interesting. Here in Miami, in Florida. Is it just Florida? Is that just an aberration there in Florida? Here's an article from Boston.com. Saturday classes across the U.S. Schools mull ways to make up lost time. Across the U.S. Saturday classes because of the coronavirus. Your kids now have to go to school on Saturdays. When students return to school after a lengthy pandemic-induced absence, the consensus is that they will have lost significant academic ground. Still unresolved for governments and educators are the questions of how or even whether teachers should try to make up for the lost learning. Some have proposed holding evening or Saturday classes for students to catch up. A Maryland center has proposed school year-round. In California, the government has suggested the school could begin as early as July. But any remediation plans will be complicated by social distancing mandates that require smaller class sizes and budget cuts. And continues on, blah, 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 blah. But let's see, they've got some more to say about these Saturday classes, I believe, here. And the effects of the lost learning could be felt for years. We might have to, just from now on, just have Saturday classes all over America because of the lost time just in the past 2 months from the coronavirus pandemic. Alabama education superintendent talking about it as well. The Northwest Evaluation Association talking about it as well. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, she's on board too. We saw her. She had a Catholic background, was connected to the organized crime family, and also her brother was the head of Blackwater, the private mercenaries. Very interesting. She's on board as well. Let's just get these Saturday classes going all over America. In Cleveland, Ohio, officials in Cleveland, Ohio have said that the multi-year recovery may include a shift toward a narrower but deeper curriculum focused on core skills. A spokeswoman for South Dakota's Department of Education, Mary Static Smith, says local school boards may be considering the Saturday class proposal. So by local school district at the most local level, according to subsidiarity, they're going to start deciding that your kids can't keep Sabbath. They're going to have to go to school because of coronavirus. All over America. Very interesting. Here, it's not just in America. French kids return to post-COVID-19 schools that are run more like indoctrination camps. That's interesting. May 13th, 2020. Students not only will be faced with extreme restrictions, but they'll be questioned about exterior or family influence at home. Say, what? What family influence are your kids now going to be questioned about in France when they return to school? With the reopening of kindergartens and primary schools in France this week, secondary schools are to follow later. Deconfinement measures are progressively implemented. School teachers are facing extremely detailed lists of do's and don'ts that include preventing children from approaching each other at less than 1 meter. That's interesting. That's quite a bit less than 6 feet. Even during recess, and banning any form of ball games because government booklets say teachers cannot be expected to clean the ball each time a pupil has touched it. But beyond the Kafkaesque rules and regulations aimed at the 3 to 5-year-olds, which is just unbelievable, a system of surveillance and denunciation is already in place. A system of surveillance and denunciation for 3 to 5-year-olds is already in place that openly encourage school personnel to trace sectarian deviance or talk of conspiracy theories regarding COVID-19 crisis and management by public health authorities. So when your kids go back to school, they're going to be questioned by the teachers as government employees to figure out, does your family have sectarian beliefs? Sectarian, that means you have like a particular sex that you belong to, a particular denomination of religion that you believe in, a particular faith sect. So if your parents are Bible-believing Christians and they think some of these things that are happening with the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic are not right, the kids over here, and now the kids are going to get questioned at school and report on their parents, whether they realize that's what they're doing or not. They're going to become spies on the families. This is the plan for reopening schools in France. 2 official documents were published ahead of reopening the schools, one entitled Listening to What Returning Students Have to Say After the COVID-19 Confinement, aims at rebuilding resilience in what is presented as a return to a secure environment, as if being home together with their parents could be considered a trauma. The document is available here. The second document bears the title, COVID-19, the Risk of Sectarian Deviance. They got a whole document on it. It speaks even more clearly about a possible change in students' attitudes or family influence. Taken together, the 2 sets of guidelines will establish a clear framework in which teachers in public schools and in state-funded private schools are clearly being encouraged to identify deviant opinions, thoughts, and attitudes, and even report families they suspect are questioning official propaganda on the coronavirus pandemic. In other words, thought police. Aimed at your children. The first document, which is all about listening, presents the monitoring of pupils as a way of helping them to get over the difficult period they perhaps did not understand, in which they were confronted with illness and death. It presents itself as aiming to offer psychological help with the traumatic experience. The document insists that school children must understand that the end of the confinement is not a return to normal. Don't ever think that the end of our confinement are being home arrest. If they end the home arrest, don't ever think that that's a return to normal. They're not going to let it return to normal, rest assured. They're only going to let it be, as our beloved Governor Baker says here in Massachusetts, we're going to return to the new normal. I'm so anxious for us to return to the new normal. Yeah, no doubt he is. But don't let the children ever think there's any hope of it ever returning to normal. That's the plan here in France. This revolutionary vocabulary can be found in the idea that we are in a moment of personal and collective transition, very interesting, a new construction or reconstruction that will require adjustments and transformation. The setting up of Satan's, satanic kingdom here on earth, the New World Order. What's going on here? This building, this reconstruction, rebuilding Babel here in France is a transition, no doubt. A whole plan of action will be installed in schools. A whole plan of action will be installed in schools, including identification of pupils who find themselves in a fragile or traumatic situation, and interventions on the part of school nurses or outside speakers in charge of listening to the students. Very interesting. It is suggested that when necessary, students can be directed to have an appointment with a nurse, a social worker, a psychologist, or public school doctor. Nothing being said about the right of parents to know about such a direction. So they're going to start questioning your kids and not tell the parents. They've got whole classes of trained experts to question your children to try to separate them from you. And here, let's skip down to here. The second document about sectarian deviance speaks more specifically of what youngsters may have heard at home during the 9 weeks in which they were free from the influence of state education. According to the document's introduction, dozens of reports related to the COVID-19 crisis have already been received by the official agency in charge of supervising sectarian deviance. They've already received dozens of reports about this sectarian deviance. These guidelines complement the listening guidelines that are in fact emphatic about repeating the official line on the coronavirus pandemic, lockdown, and further regulations linked to the sanitary crisis. The present measure is that there could soon be a second wave of infections and that an emergency lockdown will then take place. Continues to tell us, in schools, pupils are instead expected to learn to identify fake news and disinformation, which means anything that contradicts the official public discourse on the Chinese coronavirus. So if you're having any conversations at home that don't perfectly match with the government line about what's going on with the coronavirus pandemic, your kids are going to be taught at school to identify how what you say and think about the coronavirus has deviated from the official propaganda line from the government and to report you. And we've seen from our recent sermons that they're defining believing that, say, in natural remedies, fresh air and sunshine and exercise and eating healthy and maintaining your immune system is disinformation and fake news, according to official sources. And very interesting. Among ideas that are presented as being linked to dangerous cults preached by gurus or ideologists, so this is in their official government document, they're saying that they've identified how to connect dangerous cults to the pandemic, are those that suggest that the pandemic is a revealer of divine will and power. If you think the pandemic is a revealer of the divine will and power, then you're connected to a dangerous cult and need to be reported. A warning from nature, obscure forces, or divine spirits. Interesting. And this commentary says so much for Pope Francis's repeated statements about nature responding to man's neglect of the earth's needs. It's a chastisement sent from God. Very interesting. We've been looking at that messaging that's been going on. And it's also, or if you think it's a sign of the imminence of the apocalypse, then you're connected to a dangerous cult and need to be revealed, and your children need to report on you to the government. And if you believe the coronavirus is leading to a return to believing as the only saving response, if a return to believing in God is our only saving response, then you're a dangerous cult, according to this official government document in France. That needs to be reported and dealt with. And it just goes on and on and on, this monitoring that they're going to be doing through your children. What else are they doing? Senate vote allows FBI access to your browsing history without a warrant. Did you know that? Just this week. This is May 14th. This is yesterday. A single vote made all the difference. Because not all the senators were there because of the coronavirus pandemic. A single vote means that the Senate just voted yesterday to allow the FBI and other security agencies to access every American citizen's web history without requiring a warrant. Now that everybody's home, now that everybody has to do everything through their computer, including worship, the FBI has just officially been granted the go-ahead to access your browsing history at any time for any reason without a warrant, just because some government bureaucrat wants to do it. So much for caring about rights and privacy. That's the Fourth Amendment gone right there. This is really interesting as well. House resolution from the United States Congress, the U.S. House Resolution 6666. You can't make this things up. You really just can't make it up. House Resolution 6666. COVID-19 testing, reaching, and contacting everyone, or the TRACE Act. Here it's sponsored by Representative Bobby Rush from Illinois, that same place, Illinois, where the governor says that churches can never go back to worshiping as long as the coronavirus continues to exist on the planet. The Representative Bobby Rush here in the House, he introduces his bill, House Resolution 6666, to create this TRACE Act to test reaching this contact tracing that they're talking about. Contact tracing is where they is purportedly, so if anybody is diagnosed as being coronavirus or COVID-19 positive and infectious, then they're going to go back and trace everybody that you've had contact with recently for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer, really as long as they want. You see, they don't have to follow warrants anymore or anything like that. And they're going to go back and trace everybody that you've been in contact with and then inform them that they have to quarantine because they came in contact with you. And that they're doing this for everything. So they want to build a whole profile of your contacts. Now let's think about this, brothers and sisters. We've seen that there's a time coming very soon where this is going to shift from moving in darkness to being openly against those who are doing what's right in God's eyes. And those who keep the seventh-day Sabbath, those who honor God and his commandments, are going to be, we're going to become the virus that they have to deal with. And when they catch anybody at that time, they're going to use this capability that they're putting together right now, contact tracing, to go through everybody that you've been in contact with so that they can weed out everybody else who thinks like you, who's been infected with that biblical thinking that says we have to obey God in everything that we do. So they're building a whole apparatus to weed out who's who. There's that whole story in Great Controversy, I believe it was in France, where they caught one of the Protestants, and they made that Protestant go door to door with him throughout Paris, I think it was, and identify everybody else who was a church member. See, they don't even need to make you tell them anymore. They're just going to figure it all out from your online interactions through their COVID-19 testing, reaching, and contacting everyone act. This bill, proposed by Bobby Rush, just to make sure that they can do it, is proposing $100 billion for this effort. And by the way, that's just 1 year's worth. And it's expected, according to the bill, it's expected to continue every year for several years, at least, or maybe forever. 100 billion with a B to hire an entire army of contact tracers so that they can trace every single person in America and in the world, ultimately. And these grants are not just going to set up government employees, they're also going to faith-based organizations, clinics, medical centers, and other organizations which perform testing for COVID-19. So your doctors and your physicians, they're all going to be reporting on you, tracing you and tracking you and who you're interacting with. But also your faith-based organizations are all in. They're jumping right on board in this effort to trace everyone and all of their contacts. Introduced May 1st, 2020 to Congress. The HR 6666. Here's also that's from govtrack.us. This is from Congress itself, HR 6666, COVID-19 testing, reaching, and contacting everyone, Trace Act, introduced by Representative Bobby Rush. It's been referred to committee. Let's understand what this contact tracing is really all about for us. 4/28/2020, they want to fund with $100 billion just this year. A contact tracing app could help stop the spread of COVID-19 only if billions of people use it. Here's how to make that happen. Okay, they want to track everybody. Here, this contact tracing and why it's so important. It goes on to tell us, as they're seeking to do it all over the world, not just America, Singapore, Austria, China, Czech Republic, Ghana, Hong Kong, Iceland, India, Italy, North Macedonia, Norway, Philippines, Poland, Russia, South Korea, and more to come with Australia, Denmark, France, Germany, Ireland, New Zealand, and UK, and all the US states. They're all in. We're all needed to do it. They need a credible leader to emerge to do this. Here they're talking about a tech leader, but we also need, just a global leader, the Pope, to really show us what to do. These other companies need to join. Large corporations need to build their contact tracing in. Here we go. So what does it mean if they're going to implement these contact tracing measures? Here's helping us try to explain it here. It tells us, imagine, for example, if Starbucks 30,000 global locations required patrons to tap their phone on a reader before entering the store, confirming that they have contact tracing enabled and are unlikely to have been in close quarters with a COVID-19 patient in the past 2 weeks. How much sooner will you get that white chocolate mocha frappuccino with that extra shot of espresso? So very interesting here. So mass scale implementation of readers at businesses that connect with your phone to prove that you're following contact tracing. You've got it enabled so that it's keeping track of everybody that you're coming in contact with and keeping a record automatically for these intelligence agencies that all come to the dedication. And if you don't, you're not going to be able to even enter the store if you don't agree to let them trace and track everything you do and everybody you interact with. How about, imagine if Uber made its app run the same check automatically on your device, so that before sending a car, it confirmed you are low risk for being contagious and extended you the same peace of mind about the driver who picks you up. Can't take an Uber anymore unless you do contact tracing. Star Alliance flies to 98% of the world's countries. AMC runs 11,000 movie theaters. Simon Property Group controls 250 million square feet of shopping malls globally. Imagine if you had to scan your device before boarding one of those planes, entering one of those cinemas, or shopping at one of those malls. All it would take is for these 5 multinationals or a handful of similarly placed corporations to pledge to check for the Google Apple contact tracing before extending service to patrons, and 2 things would happen. So first is that Starbucks coffee shops, Uber drivers, Star Alliance Airlines, AMC Cinemas, and SPG malls would all be open for business and flourishing that much sooner. So if you don't go along with it, you're ruining the economy and you're preventing us from opening up. And second is that around the world, countless eateries, stores, hotels, stadiums, theaters, museums, schools, trains, planes, automobiles would take that pledge too. This cascade would ensure ubiquitous contact tracing around the globe. Ubiquitous contact tracing around the globe, where you can't enter business, where you can't buy or sell unless you go along with the contact tracing program for coronavirus, where you give the government and the intelligence agencies all the information about everybody that you interact with all the time. And they'll accomplish it, by the way, without a single law mandating it. They'll just get the businesses to agree to it. And if they just get a certain number of the businesses, they'll all do it. And it won't even need to be a government mandate anywhere in the world. They'll just get, they'll bypass all of the constitutional protections by doing it through the businesses. It tries to reassure us that this is a good thing. So this is implementing you cannot buy or sell, and also creating a chain of information on how to round up everybody in the church very easily by seeing who interacts with who. So that's one of the consequences of contact tracing. Here's another one. This is from Washington State here in America. The Washington State governor tells us, therefore, those individuals who refuse to cooperate with the contact tracers and or refuse testing will not be allowed to leave their homes to purchase basic necessities such as groceries or prescriptions. So in Washington State, the plan of the governor right now is if you don't go along with the contact tracers as soon as they're in place, and they're hiring them right now as we speak, then you will not only not be able to enter the businesses to buy these things for yourself, you're not even going to be able to leave the house. You will be officially on house arrest in Washington State if you don't submit to the contact tracing. That is happening everywhere now. Here's in Ventura County, California, Health Department. We'll be moving people from their homes. Speaking about an article from a World Health Organization official that said, we may have to enter homes and remove family members because of the pandemic. Here's another article talking about it from PJ Media. Every one of them, California County vows to forcibly quarantine people, separating families over COVID-19. Ventura County Public Health Director Dr. Robert Levin attempted to mollify critics and concerned about and apologizing not to forcibly quarantine people after there was a major backlash that he said that's exactly what they were going to do, because they're raising up an army of contact tracers, just at least 20,000 just in California alone. And it's started out as a pilot program, but it's going to grow larger. Don't you worry. And there's been some pushback now, but we see the mindset of their plans. Come right into your house and take your children. And this is not something that's just going on here in California in just one little locale. Here's another article also about U.S. begins to implement the WHO's contact tracing to forcibly remove people from their homes. The official at the WHO, his name was Michael Ryan, by the way, who actually said that you need to probably enter homes and separate out families because of contact tracing to keep track and control the virus. Now, what's interesting about that is it tells us here that Governor Cuomo recently, this is from today, May 15th, New York Governor Cuomo surprised to learn that 66% of hospitalized were social distancing. Huh? Wait a minute, what does that mean? New York Governor Andrew Cuomo on Wednesday revealed during a press conference that 66% of coronavirus patients, or 2 out of 3 new coronavirus patients in New York right now, who required hospitalization, so they were sick enough that they needed to be hospitalized. 2 out of 3 coronavirus patients who need to be hospitalized in New York right now had been following the stay-at-home order. Cuomo said 600 new coronavirus cases were identified in New York on Tuesday and expressed frustration with the figure, despite it being a significant decrease from the week before. How are we still generating 600 new cases a day? The governor added that most new cases were located in downstate New York, with patients requiring hospitalization remaining disproportionately African American and Latino. And he shockingly noticed the fact that 2/3 of hospitalized patients had been staying at home in social distancing. These people were literally at home. They had been staying at home and social distancing. These people were literally at home. 84% were at home, literally. Were they working? No. They were retired or they were unemployed. Only 17% were working. They're all at home, and yet they're getting coronavirus, which tells us 2 things. It tells us that the social distancing measures are doing nothing. That people who are staying home are still being exposed, and the virus is just spreading through everybody. And so there's no reason to be doing all this staying at home and social distancing for everybody. Because we talked about how more than half the population, at least 60% of the population, is still going out and going to work just as normal. And they're all spreading the virus among that 60%. And that 60% is also the one who, all the other 40% who are staying home, they all have to interact with that 60% to get their needed goods, their deliveries, and their store employees, and the healthcare workers, and the first responders, and the police, and all that. They're all out interacting with the sick people, and then they're also interacting with the not sick people. And so the virus is just spreading anyway. And then also what he's telling us here is, and I've heard this from several top public health officials now and politicians, including here in Boston, in just the past couple of weeks, where they've noticed that this now is that they're saying a large percentage of the new cases of coronavirus are all now coming, they're saying, from people inside houses, inside families spreading it. The ones who are living together and can't social distance from each other. And that's how it's spreading. And so I've heard more than one public health official say, what we need to do now is we need to start going into the houses, and when someone's diagnosed, we need to take that person and physically take them out of the house somewhere else for their safety and for the safety of the people in their house. So now if you or anybody in your household gets diagnosed with coronavirus, or even is suspected, there now may be coming public health officials with the police to come and drag family members out of your house, spouses, husbands from their wives, wives from their husbands, children from their parents. If the government thinks it's going to make them safer by separating them, because quarantine together at home is not permitted. If the government wants to separate you, you can't say that we all want to live together, and if we all get sick, we all get sick. No, not according to the government. You can't do that. They're going to come right into your house and separate and break up those believing families from each other for their good. It's all for your good. We're here from the government, and we're here to help. So this is what they're looking to do. So when they're talking about how they're doing this contact tracing and they're going to forcibly remove people from their home, they mean it. Now with the contact tracing, if you supposedly came into contact with anybody who supposedly had the virus, whether or not they're contagious or not, you're going to be compelled to quarantine. And if you're living at home with other people, they might force you to separate from the other people who you live with, your family. All from this contact tracing. If you go along, and if you don't go along, you can't eat. You can't buy groceries. You can't buy or sell. And we got to close the businesses on Sundays, and we got to send the kids to school on Saturdays. These are all the actual government policies now being implemented in response to the coronavirus crisis. All right, wrapping up. This is the last one. I wasn't sure if I was really going to talk about this, but I'll briefly discuss it just because it's so strange to me. The scriptures tell us that Satan wants to be like the Most High. And one of the ways that Satan wants to be like the Most High is God, the scriptures tell us, does nothing except he reveals his secret unto his servants, the prophets. And so God always tells in advance what he's going to do before he does it, because he's God and he can accurately, exactly tell you what's going to happen in the future before it happens. That's a sign that he's God. And he can say it and still do it, even though Satan and everybody else in the world knows that he said he's going to do it. No one can stop God from doing whatever he says he's going to do. When God says he's going to do it, he does it because he said he was going to do it. And it's going to happen. So because Satan wants to be like God and to be perceived like God, Satan does the same thing. He follows the same principle that Satan likes to say what he's going to do, the evil plans that he has before he does them, so that he can claim to be like the Most High. And we've seen this idea before in the idea of predictive programming, that many things in culture, and especially in entertainment, reveal what's happening before they happen. And we also know that there's also a general principle that many of the wicked things that happen in this world are planned by the enemies of God who rule the nations to coincide with their occult calendar of happening on specific dates that have a important occult meaning. Often, frequently, major events happen on such a day. And here, this is what I find this really interesting. There's all these ideas about this movie Larry Crown from 2011. I'd never even heard of it. I don't even remember hearing it being advertised. I don't know. And it's blockbuster movie. Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts are the co-stars for the movie. And in this movie with Larry Crown, Tom Hanks plays this guy who loses his job working at a big box retailer. Interesting. And decides that he needs to go back to school to improve his life and see, because he loses his job because he doesn't have a college degree. So he decides he's finally going to go to school. And when he goes back to school, it's very interesting what happens there. First of all, he meets like a cool girl on campus at this college, and she decides that his name, Larry Crown, is too boring and that he needs a cool name. And so she gives him a new nickname. And his new nickname is, instead of Larry, she calls him Lance. And instead of Crown, she calls him Corona. She renamed him Larry, and from Larry Crown to Lance Corona was his new cool nickname with the cool crowd of people that he connects with on this campus. making that connection. What we've seen that the word crown, corona, actually means crown in Latin. So the movie made this connection. And then all throughout this movie, in many different places, there's all these kind of like subliminal, symbolic references to the numbers 3 and 11, repeatedly throughout the movie. 3 and 11. And there's all these ideas about losing jobs and schools being closed down, and it's just all these. There's clips on it you can find where they go through all these strange discrepancies, including one day this very punctual, otherwise punctual student, Larry Crown or Lance Corona, doesn't show up to class, and the teacher asks, "Where's Larry Crown?" And one of the kids yells, "Oh, maybe he's out sick with the flu." And so there's these ideas to a contagious respiratory disease, and the numbers 3 and 11, and it's just all very, very strange. But what's interesting about that is what date here we see the coronavirus was declared officially to be a pandemic by the World Health Organization. When? On March 11th, 2020. 3/11/2020. Officially, the coronavirus became a pandemic on that date. That's when all I can specifically remember myself right now. That's when all the hosts of hell were released on 3/11. That's when everybody started to really take this matter seriously and realize that everything was changing. What also happened on March 11th, 2020, it just so happens that Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson were diagnosed with coronavirus, and they announced it to the world, which is one of the reasons why the whole world went crazy over the coronavirus. They're like, wow, this is a popular, well-known person, famous person, and even he's got the coronavirus. Wow, we got to really be scared about this. March 11th, 2020. Then, less than a week later, Tom Hanks, who is in quarantine, I think he was down in Australia, if I remember the details, or New Zealand. He was down there, I think, when he got diagnosed. So he had to quarantine in place with his wife. And in the middle of the place where he quarantined there down in Australia, he posts a picture to his Instagram account while he's in quarantine, where he just had to shelter immediately in place where he was. It just so happens that there was a typewriter there that is a Smith and Corona typewriter. And he decides to take a picture of it and post it to his Instagram account. Just so happens where he happened to have to quarantine, he just so happened to have a Corona typewriter with him. So he could take this picture and share it with everybody. Now, some other interesting things about this are here from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is a pandemic exercise called CLADE-X. This is the same institution, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, that had Event 201 back on October 18th, 2019, that specifically went through a coronavirus pandemic and all the draconian measures that had to be done in response to it. As they had this pandemic exercise 201 last fall, called Event 201, weeks before the coronavirus pandemic started. We talked about that in our previous sermon. But now I found this other one, CLADE-X, that happened on May 15th, 2018 in Washington, D.C. The one last year was actually the Event 201, that was in New York. This one was in Washington, D.C., but both were sponsored by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. So this one from May 15th, 2018 in Washington, D.C., it was also a pandemic exercise that went through many of these similar types of ideas about how to plan to destroy an economy and everybody's civil liberties in advance if there's ever a pandemic. And what's interesting about this Clade X exercise on May 15th, 2018. May 15th, 2018. If you go to March 11th, 2020, that date that movie with Lance Corona, pointed to, where Tom Hanks was diagnosed on that exact day and publicly announced it to shift the mindset of all the people. It just so happens that it's 666 days from the pandemic exercise on May 15th, 2018, to the start of the world pandemic on March 11th, 2020. Exactly 666 days to March 11th, 2020, which, by the way, March 11th is exactly 6 months from 9/11. Another favorite occult date for prominent events to happen in the world. And now, kind of like the black and the white, the reverse, the mirror image on the 6 months later in the calendar on March 11th is this occult date when the pandemic is announced, where Tom Hanks says that he's got it after this really strange, weird movie years and years before, 9 years ago, in advance, had all these hints. If you go through the thing, there was many, many things in that movie that seemed to allude to the coming pandemic. Very strange. And then the only reason I bring it up, because, first of all, I mean, none of this would really be even worth mentioning if we didn't have all that's really happening with this crisis. But it's just curious, it's just so curious to happen that Revelation 3:11, since this number 3:11 is so important with the occult, and they often take those numbers from Scripture and pervert them. What does Revelation 3:11 tell us? Behold, I come quickly. Hold fast that which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. That's a curious verse to happen to be associated with 3:11 that has now been associated with the coronavirus pandemic, that had a planned reaction to bring in draconian law, not even laws, edicts, this rule by government dictate that was designed to take away your civil liberties, to take away your ability to buy or sell, to honor Sunday, to make Saturday just another day that you have to go to school. All of these things. And now Revelation 3:11 is pointing to whether or not someone's going to take your crown. Of course, there's a beautiful, we've studied this in our Revelation studies, the beautiful true meaning of this verse. We see here they're making this weird occult connection to it. And going back to wrap up here to our Daniel study, Daniel chapter 3, where they're all called to come to the dedication. The national leaders, the state leaders, the local leaders, the royalty, the military leaders, the judges, the finance people, the academia, the local law enforcement, they're all there, the media. They all come to the dedication. They cry aloud. They tell everybody you're commanded to obey all peoples, nations, and languages. And then just very curiously, it tells us in Daniel 3:11, what does that have to say? And whosoever falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning, fiery furnace. This coronavirus, this 3:11 coronavirus crisis, is designed to take your crown and to get you to fall down and worship the 666 image that is being set up right before our eyes. As all of these things coming together, all of the world's religions coming to pray together, all of them, all the world's governments coming together with the world religions to pray with them, governors and political leaders deciding that there'll just be permanent changes to worship forever, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then Puerto Rico, Cayman Islands, Belize, Philippines, Peru, Quebec, Cyprus, Croatia, Albania, Greece, and Slovenia all have implemented Sunday laws in the past month. No business on Sunday laws or edicts, whether they're laws or whether they're edicts. Either way, they've been implemented. All of those nations have all implemented Sunday or orders or laws or rules about no business on Sunday, all in the past month or so, maybe 6 weeks. And then all the schools all across America and even in other places around the world are all deciding that to solve the problem of falling behind in school, we need to open the schools on Saturday. I mean, this is really unbelievable. And then they've got this whole contact tracing work that they're doing where they're going to tie us all together. They're going to come into houses and break up families, all in the name of fighting the coronavirus. We see the image being set up. So I bid God's people today, don't come into this dedication. Don't obey their command. Don't bow down. It's time to stand up for Jesus. Okay, let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, we see the signs on the wall, Lord. The handwriting is on the wall. We can see that time is running out. Help us to surrender all to you. Help us to be faithful, Lord. Help your people to be awake, O Lord, to realize the times that we live in, and to choose to give all to you, Lord, that you might raise us up to be your witnesses, that we might be faithful like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And whether you deliver or whether you allow the difficulties, that we might serve you and not bow down is our prayer. May it be in Jesus' name. Amen and amen.